Hello and welcome to episode 50 of the Yes You Coaching podcast. I'm your host, Anna Manning, and today we're going to be talking about resilience. And I'm just thinking, episode 50. Cool. There's some resilience right there. There have been moments during this podcasting journey where I've thought, what am I even doing? Is anyone even listening to this? Are people even interested? Because I'm kind of I'm talking to you right now. You're listening to me. But to me, I'm just kind of talking and hoping that some of it lands. So that has required a bit of resilience on my part to get to 50 episodes. And here we are. So today we're talking about resilience. And the reason I started thinking about this was because a client mentioned that they'd been to some resilience training. And after that session, I reflected that it hadn't been something that I'd talked about before. I hadn't talked about it on the podcast, never talked about it in an email. It's just not something that I talk about. And I think part of the reason for that was because I felt like resilience was a bit of a buzzword, and I'm automatically kind of annoyed and turned off by anything which is a buzzword or a bandwagon or whatever. I'm just like, oh, get me off the bandwagon. But when I reflected after that session where resilience came up, I realized that actually it was something that I have always struggled with, and it's something that I've always found difficult. And I actually chatted to my coach about it. And that session led to some really interesting insights. And I thought, you know what? It's probably a good idea for me to actually talk about this because it is something that comes up. And I know it's something that people think about. And I know also that resilience is important. So when we think about the definition of it, and I looked up the definition, it's the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties, and they characterize it as toughness. Now, I might have an issue with some of that wording, but generally, I think resilience being the capacity to withstand or recover from difficulties, right? That makes sense. And I guess in every workplace, in every person's life, in every career, there are going to be difficulties. So, the capacity to withstand those difficulties and to recover from those difficulties is actually pretty important. So, the work that I do with people around their confidence at work, some of the stuff that happens at work, regardless of what you can control, so completely outside your control, is not going to be ideal. Some of it is going to be disappointing, difficult. There are going to be failures. There are going to be moments where things, go wrong through no fault of your own. And then there's going to be moments where you get stuff wrong. And there's going to be times where you're required to work differently, maybe during a pandemic. There's going to be times where you change jobs and you don't feel like you know what you're doing anymore. There's going to be all sorts of difficulties, going to be all sorts of challenges. So thinking about the capacity to withstand and recover from those is actually pretty important for the work that I do. And when I'm talking about resilience, there's lots of different ways of thinking about it and of looking at it. And I'm not focusing on like operational resilience of a business or like organizational resilience or resilience within a team, but I'm talking about our own individual resilience. So thinking about our own capacity to withstand and recover from difficulties. And as you're listening to this episode, I want you to think about your own capacity to withstand and recover from difficulties. What's that like? How does that feel for you? Would you say, yeah, my capacity to withstand and recover from difficulties is strong. I do that. I do that easily and I do that well. Or not easily, because it's never going to be easy, but can you say that the way I approach that, the way I do that, I think I do that well? Or are you more like the camp I was in, where if somebody had asked me, like, oh, how resilient are you, Anna? What is your capacity to withstand and recover from difficulties? I would have said, actually, if I'm being honest, not that great. I find things affect me quite a lot, and I find it difficult to recover from things. Yeah. So I don't. I think in the past I would have said, no, not that great. But where's that at for you? How's your capacity to withstand or recover from difficulties? And the fact is that it's going to be different at different points in your life, and it's going to be different based on other things that are happening to you. So let's say you're going through a divorce. I'm guessing that your capacity to withstand or recover from difficulties at work will be diminished during that time because you've already got a lot of other stuff that you are dealing with. But I'm going to share today my own kind of reflections on resilience. And I don't think I'm an expert in this by any means. Some of the stuff that I talk about, yes. You think I'm something of an expert? But this, maybe not. But I'm going to share my own thoughts, my own reflections on my capacity to withstand and recover from difficulties, which I think has changed over time. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I think I thought resilience was something that it's actually not. And I think I got it really actually quite wrong, my approach to resilience. I think now looking back on it, I think I really got that wrong. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to learn something from my mistake. So I used to think that my toughness, right, how tough I was resilience. And I thought that the thing that allowed me to withstand and recover from difficulties was this sort of toughness, this like outer toughness. And it wasn't. So remember the dictionary definition of resilience. It was that capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. And they said toughness. But now I look back, I can see that my attempt at resilience wasn't actually resilience. It was just like an external toughness. It wasn't an internal capacity to withstand. It was just an attempt to deflect things, like an external shield, like an external, I imagine it like a really strong, like, I imagine glass actually, so that's not that strong, is it? But I imagine this really strong, transparent shield where things would hit me and just kind of bounce off so I wouldn't have to deal with them. And that was how I dealt with things. That was how I dealt with difficulties. Or well, it wasn't the best way of dealing with difficulties. I can see that now. But that was what I had at the time. We've got to work with what we had at the time. But that was that kind of external toughness. And I think it actually did damage to my resilience rather than helped me. And I'm going to give you a few examples of the ways that sort of external toughness showed up in my work. And you might recognize some of these and you might not, but here are some of the ways that I was kind of being tough rather than being resilient. So I was fine with making a mistake on the outside. I was fine. I would have a face, like a straight face around it. But actually, on the inside, I was beating myself up over it for ages and I was feeling really disappointed and I was shaming myself on the inside for months. Another way that toughness showed up was like acting like I didn't care about negative or difficult feedback. And I remember this one period when I became the deputy team leader of this team. And my boss kept taking me into a side room and giving me this feedback that I was like, basically, I was kind of I was leading the team wrong. I was like approaching things wrong. And I would just pretend that I was absolutely fine with it. And I really wasn't. I wanted to cry. It was like, how many times was he going to tell me the same thing? And hilariously, the feedback was actually about being too tough. So, yeah. But I would act like it was absolutely fine and it didn't affect me at all. And it's just like, okay, whatever. Another thing was like faking confidence in my new job, which I didn't feel at the time when I took that new job. I didn't feel that confident about it. But in an effort to appear confident, to kind of keep this tough exterior, I kind of faked confidence on the outside. And another way that my kind of toughness, this like external tough exterior showed up at work was expecting myself to just be able to get over things, right? That I actually just couldn't go over. So if I chose, so my thinking went, to break up my marriage during a pandemic, I should just be able to carry on as normal at work, throw myself into work. That's what other people do, right? I was expecting myself to just be able to do that when the reality was that for a good few weeks I could not. Another way that toughness showed up was telling everyone, yeah, I'm fine with it. She doesn't bother me. When I had this really tricky situation with a colleague who actually said some pretty awful things to me that were unfounded, but it was not great. It was not good. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Just doesn't bother me. When actually it did bother me, and it was quite difficult for me to deal with. Another one was pretending that I was fine about not getting an internal promotion that I'd applied for when I wasn't. I wasn't fine about it, but I pretended that I was just absolutely fine. Had this like tough exterior about it. And I wonder whether any of that fooled anyone. And if it did, I might have looked like I was really resilient, right? I might have looked really resilient. Oh, she can just get over things. She's fine with it. She coped really well with a difficult relationship. She's fine about not getting that job she applied for. She made a mistake and she's just, carrying on. Like, I probably looked really resilient, but I wasn't. I appeared tough in relation to those things, but my capacity to withstand and recover from those difficulties, I think, was actually pretty low. And no wonder, right? The internal culture that I was operating in was, Anna, do not share or show any sensitivity for the stuff that happens. You feel nothing. Keep smiling and act like everything's fine on the outside. Imagine working in that kind of culture where no matter what happens, no matter how difficult or disappointing something is, you can't show that you care. You can't show that you're emotional. You can't show that you've got any sensitivity around it. And instead, you're just expected to keep smiling and act like everything is fine. That's not a great culture to work in. I don't think that's the kind of culture that anyone would want to work in. But the reality for me was that that was the culture that I was working in. Albeit not really one that I actively chose. That was what was happening for me on the inside. Now, logically, I know that that kind of culture probably wouldn't promote resilience. But somehow, when it came to me, I was like, yes, this is the way forward. This is how to be resilient. Just be so tough and pretend that nothing ever impacts you. Well, that was then when I had one particular way of operating. But fast forward to today, and I think on reflection now, I think I am pretty resilient. But I don't think about resilience in the same way anymore. I don't think of it as toughness. I think about it more as softness and about allowing the softness that I actually have, the softness that I actually am, and being okay with that. And if you'd have told me years ago, resilience is about allowing like who you are and your emotions and like all of that, I would have been like, what the hell? Like, next? I would have thought that maybe I would have even judged people that wore their heart on their sleeve more than me. Maybe I would have thought they were less resilient than me. But the truth was they weren't. They were more resilient than me. They were braver than me. They were more confident in who they were and how they were than me. And I know usually in these episodes I kind of share like how to do this or how to do that. And I wanted to do that a little bit with you around resilience. So I really thought like, what is it that's changed in my approach that's allowed me to be more resilient now than I used to be? And looking back, I can see that it's 3 things that I think I do now pretty consistently, which have enabled me to feel more resilient, be more resilient. And the first thing is that now, and I can admit that things actually have an impact on me. I can admit that I really do care and that I am emotional. I'm doing air quotes, but you can't see it. And second, I can actually be okay with admitting that things have an impact on me and that I do care and that I'm emotional. I can actually be okay with that rather than judging myself for it. And 3, I tend to the emotions that come along with those difficulties, like disappointment, like frustration, like sadness, like anger. So rather than shove them down and pretend that they weren't happening, I have ways of tending to them. So what I used to do in the past was it was the mirror image opposite. I don't know if that's a phrase of what I do now. So in the past, when I wasn't really very resilient at all, I could not admit that things have an impact on me, could not admit that I did care, and would never admit that I was emotional. I would stay tough on the outside, even if the stuff was happening on the inside. And if something was having an impact on me, or if I did care, or if I was emotional, I would really judge myself for that. I shouldn't care. I shouldn't be bothered. I should be fine with this. I should just be able to get over it. Some people have it worse, all of that. And so what that meant was, because I couldn't admit that things had an impact on me and that I did care and that was emotional, and because I would judge myself if I was, I couldn't care for and tend to the emotions that came along with those difficulties. So instead, but they were still there. But instead of actually allowing them and feeling them and, trying to actually care for myself like you would care for anyone that was frustrated or sad, I would shove them down and pretend they weren't happening. So me in there, didn't get any support. And also I didn't get support from other people because I was absolutely fine. Why would they give me any support? And I can only, like, looking back now, I can only see this as like, these are the 3 things that I do to be more resilient, but they really are. So I admit things have an impact on me and that I care and that I'm emotional. And then number 2, I'm okay with that. I'm cool with that. That's who and how I am. Stuff has an impact on me. Really badly sometimes. Maybe sometimes I would even think maybe this is even a disproportionate reaction that I'm having, or a disproportionate response. But you know what? That's who I am. And I'm fine with it. So rather than judging myself, I'm just like, okay, well, I just find these things really difficult. I feel that pain really deeply. No judgment. And then I can actually tend to what comes along with that, the emotions that come along with that. So whether that's the disappointment or the sadness or the frustration, I don't shove it down and pretend it shouldn't be there. I acknowledge, oh, I am really disappointed. Really disappointed that thing didn't work out. I'm really disappointed that I didn't win that piece of work or that, whatever. Once I can admit that and I'm okay with it, I'm not judging myself for it, I can actually say it and be like, oh yeah, super disappointed. Sometimes, to be honest, that's all it takes for me to kind of be okay, pick up again and carry on with my day. And sometimes it's, it takes more than that. Sometimes I have to get under a blanket and not work for the rest of the day. Sometimes I have to know that frustration or that disappointment's going to come back and hit me in waves for a couple of days until I've allowed it and it's gone. It's done whatever it needed to do and it's off. So in the past, I thought being resilient is like being really tough on the outside. But what I found out was that when I'm not tough on the outside, I am more resilient. When I admitted that I'm not in fact tough at all, I'm soft core and I'm actually all right with that. And I tend to the emotions that come with it. What do you know? Out of that came resilience. So I've been talking a lot about internal culture, internal workplace culture. I have a LinkedIn newsletter and I've been really enjoying exploring some of the ideas and concepts around internal culture. And if you don't know what that is, think about the external workplace culture, right? Within your workplace, within the business, within your organization. And internal workplace culture is like your own version of that, but on the inside. So how do you deal with yourself? How do you treat yourself? How do you talk to yourself? What happens if you make a mistake? Do you get acknowledged for the good work you do? Right? On the inside, how do you deal with you? What's it like to work with you? That is your internal culture. And when I'm thinking about resilience, my internal culture around resilience, let's say my internal culture around how I dealt with difficulties was not ideal. I toughed it out. I judged myself for any emotion I did have, and I pretended that I didn't have any emotion, so I had to shove it all away and act like it wasn't happening. That was the internal culture I had. Now, you can imagine an organization where, in fact, that is the external culture. You have to pretend like you don't care. Nothing has an impact on you. You'll get judged if you do care or something does have an impact on you. And actually, you're required to shove away all your emotions and pretend it like they didn't happen. That is some people's external workplace culture. It might be the one you're working in right now. But I can tell you from having that exact internal culture that doesn't lead to a lot of resilience. Because I changed my internal culture around difficulties, so I allowed them to have an impact on me. I didn't judge myself for that. And then I could tend to the emotions that came with it. Resilience grew up as a natural byproduct from having that internal culture. I now have an internal culture that, by and large, and I'm not saying I get this perfect, I absolutely do not, but by and large, I have an internal culture that now accepts me for who I am and for how I am. So rather than forcing me into some tough box, which I never belonged in, my culture accepts me for who and how I am. Like I accept me for who and how I am. Now I work in an internal culture which says it's okay to be honest about the difficulties and the emotions that you're having. Anna, it's okay. You don't have to slap a happy face on it and try to be positive all the time. It's okay. You can be extremely disappointed about that thing that didn't work out. You can be frustrated about the fact that you can't seem to put things in your diary properly or book the right train. My internal culture recognized finally that I was a person that really struggled in moments at work. I did find things difficult and had emotion associated with it. And once I was honest about that and I wasn't judging that, my resilience grew as a natural byproduct. And as I was writing my LinkedIn newsletter about resilience, well, what I got wrong with resilience, basically, I noticed something really nice. So resilience, I'm just going to have a sip of water because I can't really be bothered to edit, but I've got a really sore throat. Thanks for bearing with me. Resilience by a dictionary definition was the capacity to withstand difficulties. And what I realized was that what I do now is I withstand with me. So I stand with myself through difficulties. I stand right by myself and I'm like, I see you and I feel you and it's okay. And I'm here for you. That's what I do now. I stand with myself, my real self, in difficulties. So when I grew my capacity to stand with myself, I actually grew my capacity to withstand difficulties. And I just love that. So, how resilient are you in the face of difficulties? And what kind of environment would you need in order to be really resilient? In order to grow your capacity to withstand difficulties and recover afterwards, what kind of environment would you need? I needed the environment where I could be honest about what was having an impact on me and not be judged for it, and have the space and time and the resources to actually tend to the emotions that came with that. That's the environment I needed in order to be more resilient. What's the environment that you need? Because you might find, like me, that if you could do with a bit more resilience, you can actually grow that environment yourself. Yes, your external environment is going to have an impact, but you also have the capacity to impact how resilient you are. And I hope for your sake that you do that better than I used to. So maybe have a think about it this week. How resilient am I? What kind of environment would I need in order to be more resilient? You've heard mine. Yours might be different. And how can I go about creating that environment on the inside for myself? All right. Last thing. We have a Grow Your Professional Confidence class coming up. It's a free masterclass that I run periodically. And it's coming up on the 29th of June 2023. So if you're listening to this before the 29th of June 2023 and you haven't already been to this class, then book and join us. It will be well worth your time. It is 60 minutes. And if you like listening to the podcast, this class will take what you've learned in the podcast and take it to another level, because you will get to apply it to you and actually come away with a workable plan to grow your confidence this year. So do join us. There's a link in the show notes. Invite anyone else who might benefit. And if you're listening to this after the 29th of June 2023, click on the link anyway, because it will take you to my link tree. And even though that class might be over, there'll be other things happening. There'll be other things happening in the community, hopefully, that you can sign up for or take part in. So click on the link and come and join us, or find out what's happening in the community. All right, I'll see you next week. Bye.